morning. Welcome to the Charter School Connection podcast. Today I'm here with John Sun, the CEO at Blueprint. How are you doing today, John?
I'm doing well, Jenna. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. We're excited to get to know more about you and about Blueprint and everything that you do. So to start with, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to be the CEO at Blueprint?
Yeah, so I, like a lot of folks, started off in the private sector. I was born and raised in South Texas, where I'm originally from. Went to public schools all throughout my life. My family eventually relocated to California, and I kind of got this kernel in my head about the ways that public education differed depending on where you lived in your zip code. And so in Texas, in South Texas, where I grew up, it was highly impoverished, still an impoverished area. I think the median income is like 50,000, if not below that right now. And contrast that with relatively affluent community that we ended up moving to in California. The public education was vastly different. The resources available and the expectations were vastly different. And so again, that kind of planted a seed in my mind about kind of the inequities in public education. Fast forward to sort of my post-college career, and I started off in the private sector, like I mentioned, was in business consulting, but had sort of this yearning to continue to want to give back to my community. And I've been doing a lot of volunteering in my local community, helping nonprofits, mainly on the sort of administrative side. And so that really then pushed me to go get my master's in public policy, which at USC, which then also introduced me to the School of Education, which at the time they were studying charter schools. And so I got to know a little bit about charter schools, and keep in mind, this was about 2003, 2004. So they were very new. They were growing in LA and fitting a big need in terms of quality education that was missing, and especially in under-resourced low-income communities. So I actually came out of grad school, and I had a friend who was working at Greendale Public Schools, a CMO that only had 2 schools at the time, but had vast ambitions to try to grow and meet that demand in LA. And they had a facilities need. And at the time, I didn't know anything about building schools. I knew about community development, I knew about real estate, but really didn't have much knowledge about what it took to build a facility, a permanent facility for a charter school. But I met with them, and I was blown away by their passion, their mission. And so I joined in 2005, and that started my pathway into facilities. And I eventually then shifted to what was then Pacific Charter School Development, now Blueprint, as a nonprofit developer that really was then able to have the resources to scale and meet multiple operator needs and multiple, kind of where they are in the life cycle. And that's how I kind of came to both Blueprint and then eventually became the CEO about 11 years ago.
That's awesome. So I'm sure in the 11 years you've been there, you've seen quite a lot of growth in Blueprint and just in the charter school industry itself. So tell us a little bit more about what Blueprint does exactly and the work that you do with the charter school facilities. I know you said you didn't know much about it when you started. So what all have
Sure. So we are a nonprofit developer of charter schools. We're really focused on finding solutions that are both affordable and sort of lasting and sustainable for the schools. And so we started out in LA. That's where we were founded, and that's where we're still headquartered. But as I took over, there were sort of 2 shifts that I saw. One is the need to continue to support, especially early stage operators. Our history had been with supporting a lot of CMOs like Greendale Public Schools, where I used to work, and helping them scale and grow to multiple campuses, right? And that's still a need, and that's still a big part of our work. But there were also a lot of these sort of startup single site operators who had a lot of ambitions to just serve that community and really serve it only with maybe 1, maybe 2 schools at most. And so we really shifted to see that, to meet that need. The second shift was to start expanding out of LA because we saw the same type of need, right? The idea of like charter schools, facilities are very intensive, cost intensive, time intensive. Right. They take on a lot of risk. They're expensive. And so we saw that demand really pull us first into the Bay Area, where we launched, then into Washington State, which had a newly formed, newly approved charter sector, and then most recently to Texas, and then in the past year and a half to Colorado.
That's awesome.
And so that's really been the shift of sort of the type of school that we support, but also the scale and the geography that we support.
That's awesome. And are you hoping to continue expanding across the country?
We are, and we've been very thoughtful about that. I think one of the key components of our success in our work is that we're very focused in the regions that we work in.
Mhm.
And so you can imagine we get calls all the time from charter
Right.
schools all over the nation saying, hey, I read about you, I heard about you. Can you help us out? And I would love to do a school in Ohio. I would love to do a school in the Northeast, but that's just not where we're based. And
Yeah.
real estate, as you can imagine, is very localized, right? You need
Mhm.
to know the experts. You need to know the
For
city
sure.
that you're working with. You need to know the environment. And so we are very dedicated solely to the regions that we work in. But to answer your question, yes, our plans are to expand to at least one new region, probably in the next 18 months.
That's awesome. I think that's such a special thing to make sure you're an expert at your area.
That's
That
right.
helps so much for charter schools. So I know most charter school leaders view facilities as a cost that they must manage, a necessary expense, but Blueprint has completed 139 school facility projects across multiple states. And you sometimes say that facilities can actually be a strategic enrollment asset. What do you mean by that? And what are the schools missing when they only think of the facility as a budget and not an asset?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And so you can imagine, like, these schools have a culture that they're trying to build, right?
Mhm.
They are a flagship in the community, a shining beacon within the communities that they serve. And so we strongly believe that the facility should reflect that, right?
Mhm.
It should be a place of joy. It should be a safe environment, a place of obviously learning. And so we really want to, when we try to build these facilities and find their solutions, reflect that. At the
Mhm.
same time, we live in an economic reality, right? There are budget constraints, and we also want every dollar that we can to go into the classroom, right? We
Mhm.
always say that we want to go into classrooms, not into construction. And so our model is designed, and our support is designed to be really streamlined to be able to help these schools both sort of thread that needle, right? Find a facility solution that reflects their culture, reflects, their importance in the community, but at the same time be financially achievable. And it's a tough needle to thread, right? And a lot of folks kind of get caught up in that, like you said, of being focused very much on maybe the financial transaction, or very much focused on sort of the dream state, which is like, I equate it a lot to home shopping sometimes, of like
Mhm.
folks have this ambition that when they start shopping, that they really have their dream home in mind, which they deserve, right? Absolutely.
Right.
Everyone deserves their dream home, right? But there's a reality of how do you can you actually achieve that? And maybe you are 1 or 2 steps away from that dream home. So let's,
Mhm.
talk about what can get you stabilized. Again, for early stage or newly authorized schools, what can get you open and successful, what's easily accessible, what's safe, what's warm, what's inviting. And there are ways to do that, even in a temporary facilities, situation. And so we are able to help them navigate that and show them what's possible, while again, kind of living within the real realities of the financial realities.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Along with the financial realities, I know with charter schools, most of them already have like an established area that they want to be in. So when you're looking at the location for these buildings, like obviously location is so important. How should charter school leaders think strategically about site selection, communities, especially when they're trying to compare different options and what would work best for the school to be instruction and, as you said, like classroom focused?
Yeah, there are a few elements that we think about when we're trying to help a school find a location. I think one is obviously, proximity to students, proximity to families, the ease of that, right? That's a given. I do think the reality of trying to figure out like what's achievable, right, within a certain time frame and what's not, right? Again, the idea of like you want to build the dream facility, the dream home for the school, the
Mhm.
permanent home. But sometimes either because you're constrained by space, constrained by location, constrained by city requirements, constrained by budget, that can't happen right away. And so what
Right.
can we achieve that actually gets you stable, creates that culture, creates the momentum to then get you what you want? I also find folks sort of get laser focused on the solution, like the permanent
Mhm.
solution of like, this is the only thing I need to have, and this is the only thing I'm going to advocate for. And again, these are very passionate advocates, right? They
Right.
are student focused, they are student advocates, and they absolutely are amazing at what they do. But that passion sometimes derails them in terms of intensity, in terms of focus, in terms of resources. And so they spend a lot of time trying to chase these sort of dream states. They spend a
Mhm.
lot of, sometimes, unfortunately, resources, both money and time to do that. And they also sometimes get stuck in this paralysis of like, I need to get it, but I can't get it. Like, I don't know how to get out of first gear, right? And so we meet a lot of these schools in these moments, right? These moments of almost, they feel like crises of like, hey,
Mhm.
I'm scrambling. I've got this pressure to open, or I've got this pressure to like enroll kids, and I don't have enough space, or I'm growing and I need to get there. And so what do I do? And like a lot of it is sort of two stages. One is like, let's just take this rationally, right?
Mhm.
Let's talk about your financial constraints. Let's talk about what operational requirements you have. Let's talk about the amenities that you ideally want. And then let's hone in on that, and let's try to build momentum off of that, right?
Right.
Let's get in there. Let's start looking at these buildings. Let's start evaluating. Let's talk to the city. Let's hire some experts to do due
Mhm.
diligence. Like, let's just get momentum, right? It may not be the dream state. It may not be
Right.
the dream scenario. You may not see the end, right?
Right.
The light at the end of the tunnel. But like, we got to build momentum. Like, we got to get going first of all, and then providing clarity of like, what
Mhm.
is the pathway to get there, right? What
Right.
are the steps? What are the gating issues or gating items that we need to address? What are the risks involved? What are
Mhm.
the key decision points and key decisions that we or you as a
Right.
school leader or a board of a charter school need to make? And like, let's just be mindful of that and understand what the process looks like, and also be mindful of the risks. Like, this may not
Yeah.
work out as planned, right? And so let's
Right.
be honest about that. And so I think once you establish those two and get the leader comfortable and the community comfortable with that, then suddenly you see this take off. Like,
Mhm.
it's kind of amazing, like how the light bulb comes on and like
Yeah.
everyone starts to move and go towards the goal. And more times than not, like we can achieve it. And
Yeah.
so that's really what I counsel school leaders on when I sort of meet them in the early stages of this process.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think so many of our listeners would learn so much about that. I know with finding your dream home, your dream school, like obviously choosing the right location and the right neighborhood is so important for the school. But on top of that, how important is it to customize the facility to meet the needs of the students and families? And what are some examples you've seen that customization makes a real difference in attracting and retaining students?
Yeah, so it's hugely important. Like I said, we wanted to reflect the community. We want to reflect the culture that they build. We want to reflect the academic program, the uniqueness, right? The ambition that
Yeah.
we talk about. And so when we do that, we try to do that with that in mind and be very thoughtful about that, right? And sometimes it can be architectural, right? We have a school in LA, USC Hybrid High, that is, you can imagine by the name, connected
Mhm.
and adjacent to the USC campus near downtown LA. And there was an ambition from them to say, hey, it's a project-based learning model.
Mhm.
It's obviously college-going model because of the connection with USC. And they wanted the facility to reflect that, right? And so part of it is there's a lot of glass, it's open to, you can see the university from
Mhm.
the windows of the
Cool.
school. There are steps, and there are areas like almost like a sort of college environment, right? Like a college student union
Mhm.
environment where students can, between classes or even during class, step out, have couches, have the stepway to sit down, reflect, work on their work either by themselves or in group settings. There are breakout areas. There's flexible space that have accordion walls, accordion doors. And so there's different ways to address that. I think on the other side, when you don't have the ability or you're not there yet to be able to build a brand new building that has all these
Right.
amenities, it's really in the minor details of like the paint colors,
Mhm.
right? The natural light that you can bring into a space. It could be a church, a renovation, right?
Yeah.
And we do that with Elevate in Houston, which is a single site operator. They're running a very successful school literally on the bottom floor of another charter school. They were co-located, they were
Wow.
renting the bottom floor. And it was a very typical like office park, kind of like,
Mhm.
not designed to be learned, but they were learning and they were enrolling kids. And so they were bursting at the seams. So they needed our help. We eventually found a church space just a mile or two away from their existing campus in the heart of the community that they actually wanted to serve, and we transformed it. And when we stepped in, it's like a typical church space, right?
Right.
They had some Sunday school classes, but they were kind of like in the corners, and they had moved some walls around, and there was amazing um, sort of like this like hexagonal, like almost like an auditorium, but it had been covered up, right? And so
Mhm.
we went there and we were like, you know what? This could be an amazing learning space. And we needed extra classrooms. So we said, hey, can we build a second floor in this sort of mezzanine space, open up the walls and create this, creative learning environment with a very limited budget, right? We were working on very tight dollars and again, in an existing space. Like we didn't have the ability to build something new and beautiful. And so we did that. And it turned out amazing. And it's such a great space, learning environment for the students. And again, it was done on a very sort of modest budget that I think a lot of charter schools would like, but still reflects a uniqueness and a fantastic learning environment that the students and families deserve.
That's awesome. There's so much that goes into it that I would not even think of when it comes to finding a facility. And I know you've mentioned a couple of times that Blueprint is very intentional about helping schools save money or better manage their facility costs to save money. Walk us through an example of what this looks like. Like, where are most charter school leaders overpaying or making expensive mistakes that they don't even realize that you've been able to help them realize and cut out of their budget?
Yeah, so I think for starters, I think figuring out what you can afford, right, is a key element. I think folks maybe have a facilities number in mind, or maybe they had seen other school leaders that have already, opened or been established and sort of use them as a baseline. But what is unique to your model and what can you actually afford that doesn't compromise your program, right? The all the elements that we need to run a successful school besides a facility. And then being realistic about what it takes to actually then find or build a facility in your neighborhood, right? As we see, and it's been unfortunate across, again, the geographies that we work, is the increase in expense, right? Increase in real estate costs, increase in construction costs,
Right.
increase in the complexity of permitting and getting a school approved, which, time adds cost, right? All these things add up. And so at the end of the day, these places that were maybe affordable 5-10 years ago are now inching closer to unaffordability, right? And so how do you actually address that? And I think that's where the uniqueness of our model comes in, because again, as a nonprofit, we provide both sort of that technical expertise of like, what does it take to build a school? How much is, what's the baseline of an affordable school to guide them in the early days, but we also have a very unique sort of investment model that we use that blends philanthropy with private capital, right? We were one of the first sort of impact investment vehicles in the charter school space. We've been around for 21 years, right?
That's awesome.
And our model was always be creative, to like leverage philanthropy in a creative way, because philanthropy historically and continues, and philanthropy is amazing at supporting individual schools, right? We've seen it like capital campaigns, grant making, right? Naming rights, right? We see a lot of these sort of supports, but they're sort of one-time supports,
Right?
A philanthropy will say, hey, I'll give you $1 million grant or $500,000 grant to build your facility. That goes into a great school and it's done. It's in the building, right? Versus our model is we leverage that $1 million and say, one, we can spread it across multiple schools that we work with. Two, we can recycle that money, because once these schools, like our model is to always have the school own the building eventually. Like we don't want to be long-term landlords. We want the school to own. This is their asset, right?
Yeah.
And then three, we can leverage it with this private capital. So suddenly that $1 million gets amplified 5, 10x and has a huge lasting impact. And so that's the other uniqueness in our ability to try to help these schools in terms of affordability, is to really drive down that cost with the blending of sort of this uniqueness of philanthropy and private capital.
That's awesome. That's so interesting. I think that's so helpful for our listeners and at school administrators to know. Just budget is such a constraint right now within charter schools. I think it's important for them to see different ways that they might not have thought about for it. And so with the current national momentum behind charter schools right now, what advice would you give to the school leaders who are thinking about either expanding or opening additional campuses? And what kind of things should they be thinking about on the facilities side that might be different than when they first opened the school, now that they're ready to expand?
So I think it's a few elements. I think one is definitely leaning on the expertise that's out there and the wisdom that's been built, right? I think in most states there now have been permanent facilities that have been built either through a third party like ours, right, a nonprofit support, or by other charter schools that have gone through the process themselves, right? And so really honing in and listening and being mindful of those resources and embracing those resources, I think is really key. I think a lot of school leaders, again, because they're ambitious, right? They have a dream. They have a they're advocates for themselves and for their students. Try to take this on, right? It becomes a sort of this personal mission, which I totally understand. But at the same time, there's many resources that are available to them to try to offload that. And I've met so many leaders over the 20 plus years that I've been in this work, where they're driving around looking at spaces. They're spending half their time, like as a real estate broker or with a real estate broker, like going to meet with churches, driving by a piece of land, talking to a contractor. And when I sit down with them, I'm like, is this really the ideal use of your time? Like, don't you want to be in the classroom doing professional development, right? Building that culture, training your staff, meeting with families, engaging with the students. And they say, yes, that's what I want to do. But I feel this call, this burden to try to take this on because I don't know how, and I'm so solution oriented. Like, this is what I do. And I say, well, there's other people, ours included, where we work, that can offload this. And so they get their arms around that and say yes, and then eventually 2-3 years later, when we deliver it, they're like, thank you so much. Like, it was a blessing that we sat down, you had that honest conversation with me to sort of realize what the best use of my time was and how there are other, supports and resources to do that. I think, like I said earlier, I think being very mindful of like what you can afford and what the steps are to kind of get there, even if you're in your second, third year, right? It's a lot of charter schools in the early days, their success was based off of being scrappy, of finding that, that facility that maybe, again, is not sort of the ideal setup or the ideal scenario, but like quality education happens anywhere. Like, quality education happens all over the US, no matter what the condition of the facility is. And so they have every right to advocate for what they want, but I think being realistic about what's achievable and then taking the steps necessary to sort of get to that point, right? And have that strategy built and have that strategy in place, have that honest conversation with their constituents, their board members, their students, their teachers, about what the reality is, but what the ambition is, I think is important too. And then being able to like lean on those supports and then try to drive that home is, I think, at the end of the day, what we all want.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's spot on. So if any of our listeners in California or Washington, Texas, Colorado are interested or looking at new facilities, could they reach out to you? How can they contact you to seek some of your expertise when starting a facility search?
Absolutely. Yeah. So they can contact us through our website, blueprintfutures.org. We've revamped it recently, and you can see sort of all the projects that we've done, across all these states that you mentioned. And so they can zoom in and figure out, kind of see examples of the work, both in terms of just like the facility and kind of what the end product looks like, but also more about the type of schools that we work with, the variety of our portfolio, and our intent, like I said, in each of the regions that we work in. Like, we are very mindful of only focusing in those regions and not, just dropping in and doing a project in a random location and then leaving and kind of doing, like, we're not driven by doing projects for project's sake. We're driven by the mission and being supportive of the environments that we work in. And then more importantly, our partners. And so that's a critical piece of what we do, is we partner locally with, an education champion or local philanthropy. And you'll see that reflected again in the details on our website, but even, talking to folks in the community, in the local charter sectors, that we're very mindful. Like in Colorado, for instance, one of our key partners is Colorado Schools Fund, who supports the growth of quality charter schools throughout the state. And so we try to support a majority of their portfolio in trying to build as many quality seats and quality schools as we can across the entire state of Colorado. And so that's an example of kind of where we have strong partnerships. Charter School Growth Fund's a strong partner of ours. They've been on our board since our inception. And so they're also a good sounding board to ask about like what the support and if Blueprint is a good fit for them, for which generally we are.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think partnerships are so important in this industry for everybody. If some of our listeners in any other state that you're not already in, if they were interested in a new facility, what would you recommend them doing, since they can't unfortunately use Blueprint at the moment, hopefully in the future? But what would you recommend for them? Could they reach out for you for advice, or do you have like contacts in other states? What's the best way for them to move on in their facility build?
I think both. I think we're always happy to take a call. I think last year we talked to a school in Mississippi that, was running into some issues and just needed some advice. And we did a couple calls with them, and hopefully we're able to help guide them. And so we're happy to do, always happy to take a call or a Zoom call or whatever it takes to do that. And we can refer them to partners. There are other folks like us, either nonprofit developers, nonprofit lenders, who are partners, that we'd be happy to refer them to. And I think continue to advocate for themselves. I think they're the strongest voice, right? And so whatever support organizations that exist locally that they have, again, philanthropy, education champions, charter school associations, I think the more they sort of voice this need, and creates this, environment to say, hey, we really need a solution that's scalable and really kind of helps, our sector achieve the ambitions that we all have, is important, because that's what then draws folks like us, right? That's the story. Again, I talked about, expansion out of California to both Washington State, Texas, and also Colorado. And that's really, there was a lot of like local momentum of like, hey, this is a issue. Like this is, across multiple operators, not just one. And it was through that sort of advocacy that, local support organizations said, hey, we really need to figure out a solution. And that's what then led to sort of bringing us into the fold and saying, hey, we really would like someone like Blueprint to come in and help us at scale, try to help all these schools that are facing a similar issue.
I think that's so helpful. And I think our listeners can learn so much just from this podcast and talking to you. To wrap up, is there any other questions or things that I did not ask that you would like to share with our listeners?
I just think, part of what we do and part of what I really emphasize with my team is the empathy for the school leaders, right? I worked within a charter school organization, and so I've seen it firsthand what it takes to educate kids, and they have the toughest job. And so as much as we are in the weeds and we're trying to build buildings and get them done under very tight time frames and very tight budgets, we have a lot of empathy for school leaders and appreciation for what they do. So just want to express that, and again, it's a really big part of our ethos and our culture and our values.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Do you have any favorite books, podcasts, YouTube videos that have really inspired you, or you recommend that other people listen to or read?
That's a good one. I don't have any podcasts in mind that I can think of. I've been reflecting a lot on Waiting for Superman, which everyone knows about, right? And sort of the reflection, 25 years later after that, right? That was the impetus for sort of Green Dot opening, and again, my entry and a lot of other folks' entry. And so I like to go back in a lot of ways, books also, to some of the earlier work as sort of a baseline to like what brought me here, right? Sort of constant sort of reconnection with that passion and what excited me about supporting charter schools, but then also reflecting on how much we've accomplished since then, right? In the evolution of public education, but also the need, right? The vast need that's out there that's still unmet, right?
Yes.
And that every child deserves a quality education, and that really drives me. So it's really just a reflection of some of the older works, and then kind of contrasting that with where you are and sort of reflecting and reorienting yourself and continuing in your sort of personal and sort of shared mission.
I love that viewpoint. I think that's so important, is make sure to take a moment to look and see how far we've come. Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being a guest on the Charter School Connection podcast, and we will make sure to put blueprintfutures.org, a link to that in our show notes, and your contact information. And I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm sure our listeners are going to learn so much from this conversation. So thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you. This was fun.